Welcome friends, welcome back to the hangar, welcome back to Chris's hangar. Mike Victor uniform is back in Chris's hangar for its annual, and while it's in for its annual, we're going to do some other things. We're going to add this Trio Avionics Autopilot to the plane, and I'll get into why I chose this one a little bit later. So the first annual inspection, I've been flying Mike Victor uniform now for a year, since Chris signed off the paperwork after all of the major work was done. It's been flying great. There are a couple of little things that we need to look at while it's in the shop. One of them is this, this temperature probe for the Dynon. We stuck it here because there was a hole in the side of the plane. I mean, we stuck it here because there was a hole in the side of the plane. The Venturi used to be in this spot. It left a hole and we took the Venturi off because we didn't need the vacuum system anymore. This fit perfectly, so that's where we stuck it, but I'm not getting accurate readings. And initially, and some people said in the comments too, that perhaps the exhaust is coming up and interfering with it. That's not actually what's happening. Right behind here is the ductwork for the cabin heat. So when I've got the cabin heat on in the wintertime, this area is getting really hot and it is changing the temperature reading because it's heating up this entire area. So we're going to move this. I don't know where we're going to move it to. It might come out here onto the wing in one of these inspection panels. Kind of seems like the easiest place to put it. There's a couple of other things that we're going to do as well, and then we're going to get into putting in the autopilot. This is the part where Chris has to read the installation manual.
I'll read the chapter and then I'll go back to the beginning of it.
And then go back.
See if I can figure out that if I blindly go in and start doing this, I'll wind up with it upside down. And at the end, I'll go, oh.
Yeah.
So this is all you have to do is put the screw in.
So that's step one. Lay everything out on the bench. Check it all.
Check
go through
the manual. We're supposed to go through the manual and make
Yep.
sure it's all there. So it looks like it.
Yep.
Get an idea what things look like. Right? So this bracket, and just kind of start to map it out a little bit.
Yep.
Well, it's pitch. See?
So that's a roll. So that one goes with that bracket. So the other one is the pitch actuator. It goes in the tail, and then this is the head that goes in the panel.
Nothing for y'all, eh? You're gonna have to use your feet.
I have to use my feet. So while Chris is figuring out the autopilot, we're also doing the annual at the same time. So I'm going to pull apart the interior of the airplane. I have to take everything out: the seats, the floor, the extended baggage compartment. Everything has to go. Okay, so another part, we've got the interior stripped out. All the seats and everything's gone. Now it's a matter of pulling apart the panel. Take the Dynon system out, the radio, take this panel off, and Six Pack Aero has made us a replacement. Thanks, Lyle. You did a really good job. And so it's pulling all of this stuff out, marking all of the wires so that we know where it goes back into, and then we can put the new panel in and work the wiring for the autopilot into the panel.
Just a ground, yeah, any ground. So I wonder why they didn't just put it with this for me. Or give me enough length that I can go to the same ground point. Then the rest of them, okay, so that's my power and ground. So while Chris works out the wiring diagram and the wiring harness, I get the relatively simple job of replicating the new panel, putting in nut plates and the shelf to hold the Dynon avionics and stuff, get it all ready to go back into the plane. I think we're making good progress for today. So do we have a data type? Okay. Yeah. And it goes here and you animate. So the Avlink GPS data in. So this is D. So page 26-9. Okay, 26-9. Let's go right there. Okay, the folded one. Yep. Right. So on 26-9, that wire goes into one of these pins that's called serial. Okay. So yeah. It's a serial data. So it's 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, or 9. Yeah, and this is the harness that comes out of the back of the Dynon screen on the panel. Okay. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter which one. I can't remember. Like, just refresh me.
No, it's serial. It can be any one of the ones.
And so if I do it on the plug on the back of the right one or the left one, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Okay, so the one on the right seems like the right one to do because that's the one we got disconnected.
Yep.
So from the wiring harness in the panel, we have to run a wire out to the servo, the roll servo in the wing, and it is red for roll. And then there's one that has to go under the floor to the aft compartment, and it is black for back.
Black for pitch.
For pitch. So one's for the roll servo and one's for the pitch servo. So we've mapped out how to get it through the wing, through all of the baffles and the cable runs. It's up to me to make it happen, I guess. Now, the wire, when we feed it through the airplane, doesn't have the connector on the end, but the sleeves are all on it. So I have to put the sleeves into the connector, little pins, tiny little writing, color coding. So white wire goes into number 4, which is that one. There's a little tool to push it in. And if I screw it up, there's a little tool to pull it in. Chris tells me it's called a back shell.
Use the proper term.
If I want to use the proper term, it's called a back shell.
If you're doing it this home, if you're doing this at home, you can use whatever terminology you like. No one cares.
So this is the point where I guess I have to explain why I chose to put the Trio Avionics Autopilot in Mike Victor uniform. I've said this before, Mike Victor uniform, certified aircraft, Cessna 172, 1961, Model B. For this airframe, there are very few autopilots that are certified to work in this age of aircraft, in this particular model of aircraft. One of them, the cost of the autopilot, just to buy the equipment, not the install, was more than I paid for this aircraft 2 years ago. So that was out. I mean, many times more than what I paid for this aircraft. So that autopilot was out. That autopilot also doesn't communicate at all with the Dynon glass panel that I have in this plane. So not only would it not communicate, it was just too expensive. Out. Which leaves me with 2. The other one is the Bendix King. What are they calling it now? It used to be called the True Track Aero Cruise. The Bendix King Aero Cruise. That one was a little more costly than the Trio. Within my budget range. It does talk to the Dynon, and most people who have it are fairly happy with it. SoCal Flying Monkey has one with a Dynon panel. He seems pretty happy with it. I thought it was lacking some features that the Trio has. So the Trio has, to me, a better feature set. The Trio, to me, was going to be an easier install. Because it comes with all of the parts and the brackets. I give them the serial number of Mike Victor uniform, and they make up all of the parts and the push rods and the tubes and everything so that the install goes a lot faster. Their wiring harness is amazing. Really, there's 4 or 5 wires that we connect into the Dynon panel to get the functionality. The one downside, of course, is right now, this is still a full-featured autopilot. This head will allow me to do everything that an autopilot, everything that I want the autopilot to do, I can do here.
it doesn't fully communicate yet with the Dynon. The software is coming. They say the software is coming. So I'm taking a gamble that at some point in the next year, the software is approved and this will be fully functional from the Dynon system. So I would, what I do right now is I put in my flight plan into ForeFlight, figure it all out, and then send it to the Dynon panel. That flight plan is now in the Dynon panel, and all of the information is up on the glass panel in front of me. And then it shoots it over to this. So we've got the wires run to the back. We've got them out to the wing. Chris is going to start installing the plates and the servos. So while Chris is working away on the brackets, I'm going to get the servos ready. The servos, box like this, and then they come with a package of parts. Things like arms and screws and bolts and stuff like that. And the instructions are really clear how to put the crank arm on and how to put everything together the way it's supposed to go. So I'm going to work on the bench here. I'm going to assemble some of the parts, take them to Chris, and he can attach them to the brackets. So the hub arm goes on, and then these metric screws go in, and they have been coated in Loctite and allowed to dry, so just follow the instructions. And so we did run into a little bit of trouble earlier with one of the wiring diagrams. We weren't completely sure about which wire to connect to the Dynon or where it went. So we called, and someone answered the phone, an engineer answered the phone, was able to answer our question really quickly, made everything clear, and we were able to move on. And I think that kind of customer service is great. Okay, so the servo and the push-pull tube. We'll go over and see Chris. So the physical mechanical installation of this autopilot is pretty straightforward. Where it gets difficult is you're working above your head, and you've got your hand through a fairly small hole going into the wing. There's not a whole lot of space up in between the two wing skins. That's where the difficulty lies. And you often, as in this case, I can't really see what I'm doing. But here's how this goes together. Over here, at this point inside the wing, is where the servo goes, the roll servo, connected electrically to the panel. From the roll servo here, out here to the bell crank that actually actuates the ailerons, there is a push-pull tube. So the servo activates, pulls on the bell crank, and it moves our ailerons. Fairly straightforward. Just a little tight, and you have to do a little bit of thinking of the order that you have to do things in because you can't see. I mean, there were bolts in here that I couldn't see. I had to put them in, and I had to use my hands and feel through the hole and see if I could find them. Okay, I'm going to continue, concentrate on what I'm doing. Okay, so not a lot of room in the aft compartment of the aircraft. This first section here is the extended baggage compartment. So I've taken the floor out of the extended baggage and the bulkhead off so that we can go one area back in the aft of the aircraft. And this is where the pitch servo goes. So, excuse me while I crawl even farther back into the plane. So back here you can see I've got these pieces of angle aluminum, and I need to build a platform that goes from this bulkhead to that bulkhead, roughly in line with these cables. I'm not a mechanic. You probably know that already. So these cables, Chris is monitoring me very closely. He's making sure I'm doing it correctly, and he's going over all of my work before I do it. So This platform is then where the servo sits. I don't have enough hands. And the servo actuates this arm. And the arm attaches to this cable, which changes the pitch. I'd love to film me actually doing this, but I can't set up the camera. There's no light. It's jammed back here. I'm going to have to be like a contortionist to get some of these holes drilled and put in rivets and bolts and everything else. So I'll show you a picture when it's done. Okay, so a few hours and a little bit of cursing later, the pitch servo is installed but not yet attached to the cables. That's up to Chris to do the rigging. Never again. Never again. It's all coming together. The panel is all back together. The Dynon system, we took everything out. We unplugged all of the wires so that we could gain access to the back. All of the controls had to come off of the panel and through the firewall. Comically, some of these mechanical things from the 1960s were the most difficult parts of the project to this point. Feeding everything through the firewall, attaching it, adjusting it, making sure that it's all back to where it's supposed to be, proved more difficult than for me to rewire the Dynon, because that's all just plug and play. Even wiring in the Trio Autopilot that's right here was fantastically simple. One wire to the Dynon to get GPS information, and that was it. There are a couple of wires that we didn't connect, of course, because they're not functional yet. So we didn't bother connecting them. We didn't want to screw that up. This, holding the yokes together, is for the rigging. Chris is going back through all of the cable connections to the ailerons and the pitch and the rudder and all of that to make sure that the cable is tensioned correctly and all of the bell cranks are in the correct place, because we have added the autopilot to those mechanically. Just wanted to make sure that everything was fine. So this is holding that firm. I think at this point, I'm ready to reconnect the electricity and fire all of this up and make sure that it works. Master's on. And everything's firing up. Look at that. So at this point, press this button, and it's telling me, the Trio is telling me there's no GPS signal, which is expected because I know that inside Chris's shop, no GPS signal comes in. So the Dynon's not getting GPS either. We're gonna have to roll it out of the hangar to figure that out. So now we're on to final setup, which means going around and adjusting all of the push-pull tubes to make sure that everything's zeroed out correctly. And my job is to take a whole pile of these cable ties and go through the aircraft and tie up all of the cables, tie them into place, make sure that nothing's moving around and nothing is where it isn't supposed to be. And then we can close this up and push it back and start doing some testing. So out there at the servo, Chris is making adjustments. And in here on the head, we need to get this measurement to 0.0. And right now we're at -2. Minus 0.2. And Chris is working through a hole above his head. Can't see what he's actually doing.
I can see it, I just can't touch it.
You're on 0.
Okay.
I've got the easy job, just relaying the information.
If I took the lock off, it'd be easier, but I want to keep the lock on for sure.
So there you go. 0.0. Is that even in focus? We've got it met. Chris is putting in the cotter pin. And the roll servo is done. Now we just need to move to the back of the plane and do the same thing with the pitch servo. Pretty much the same procedure. Okay, so I'm sitting in the cockpit. We've got the installation complete. There's paperwork. The post-installation test flight cards, and I have filled them out. I've already done this testing. I did this testing in a very sterile environment. I didn't want to have the cameras on while I was doing it because I wanted to concentrate and make sure that everything was correct. But essentially what it comes down to is this is our autopilot unit, and it sits in the panel like that. I have all of the Dynon equipment off, so it's not passing any GPS information or flight plan information to the autopilot. We do the elevation set, and then it tells me that there's no GPS. Of course there's no GPS because it's all turned off. I do, I don't know, I can't hold all the cameras. Let me see. So I press these two buttons and it puts us into maintenance mode. And we come over to the LNAV and put it into test mode, engage the servos. Let me turn it off and turn it on again. You might be able to hear the clunk. So the servos are on, and it's very difficult to turn the yoke because it's trying to keep us straight and level. But if I go full, it pulls us back. Full the other direction, pulls us back. Exactly what it's supposed to do. And we test this, and also it's very important, this comes back to 0.0, which means we've got it completely straight and even. Chris went through the rigging incredibly well, made sure everything was tied up properly, tensioned correctly. So I think this is going to fly really well. Now, if I turn this, this just means that I can turn the servo, and you can see the yoke moving as the servo changes the ailerons. There we go. So I can bring that back to 0. There is this button here, which is the recovery button. If you're in flight and you end up in an attitude that is, you know, not very pleasant, upset attitude, you press this, and the autopilot will bring you back to straight and level flight. Excellent idea. This little button here, is our cutoff or shut off. So if I've got the autopilot on, which it is right now, press that button and it disengages it. I love these 1961 yokes, but the thing about these yokes is they're cast, they're solid. You're not allowed to drill into them. You're not allowed to put a hole in them. You're not supposed to anyway. Probably lots of people do. So there's very few mounting options for this disengage switch. And there's very few mounting options for my push-to-talk switch either. So I made this little thing out of carbon fiber, P-clamped it on here, cushion clamped it on. It's going to be fine. It'll be great. So the weather outside is horrific. Really bad, rainy, foggy, late winter day, early spring day. Spring is on the day that I'm shooting this, spring is like 2 days away. So we're not going to be able to get it up into the air for a few days. So I'm going to end this here. We passed our annual. We came out really well on all of our compression tests. The engine checks out. All of the cubby holes check out. The installation of the autopilot went really well. I'm very happy with this visit to Chris's shop. We'll get you out flying on the next one, and we'll put the autopilot through its paces. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.